So we need to have a serious conversation about an injury epidemic that you might not have heard of. Over a recent 18-month period, more than 195 elite women's players have been sidelined by ACL injuries. That's compared to just 9 in the last 18 months for the men's game. In those 195 injuries, a total of 30 players missed the Women's World Cup last year due to ACL complications, and 25% of women's Ballon d'Or nominees were left sidelined. That is 25%. After Chelsea forward Mia Fisher suffered yet another torn ACL this February, many players past and present in the women's game have come forward pleading for more to be done to limit the epidemic currently occurring in the sport. Now, while on average 43% of athletes suffer at least one injury a year, the discussion around the medical side of athletics is ever intensifying. Us fans see injuries as part and parcel of our favourite sports, but it's no secret that they can have devastating impacts to a player's career aspirations. In the sporting world, the ACL injury is one that is considered to be one of the most damaging to an athlete. To be honest, any injury regarding the knee is scary. So when talking about ACL specifically, we have to first know what on earth an anterior cruciate ligament is. I am no scientist in the slightest, so I thought it'd be a good idea to speak with a specialist in the field.
Thanks TJ, and hello FOOTNOW.
So this is Physio Owen, a health specialist from just over the pond in Dublin, who you might know from the slightly squeamish TikTok videos breaking down athletic injuries.
My name's Owen, or Physio Owen. I'm a physiotherapist working with the FEI women's at youth level, so this topic is quite close to my heart at the minute. So what exactly is the ACL? Well, let's have a look, shall we? So, in general, when we're talking about the ligaments of the knee, the clue is generally in the name. I'm going to open up the knee joint and already point them out. It's this fella here. ACL stands for anterior cruciate ligament. So anterior means it's at the front relative to the PCL, the posterior cruciate ligament. Cruciate means cross. It makes a kind of an X shape, a cross shape with the PCL. And ligament, it connects a bone to a bone, your femur to your tibia. So the main jobs of the ACL are going to include stopping your tibia translating forward relative to your femur and also to resist rotational movements. So naturally anything that overstresses those directions is going to cause injury. And around 70% of ACL tears in elite sports happen with no contact at all. Very particular mechanisms of injuries, especially in football, are going to come from hyperextension injuries and also when the boot gets caught in the turf and then there is a rotation, especially when the knee is put into what's called a valgus position, but we'll discuss a little bit more about that later. For now, I'll send you back to TJ.
Thanks, Owen. So now that we know more about the ligament, we need to see how it can really affect an athlete's career trajectory. A couple of examples from two different sports are Derrick Rose and Ledley King. Both stars have had the course of their sporting trajectories completely shifted with knee problems. Derrick Rose was one of the most explosive players coming into the NBA after the Chicago Bulls had drafted him with the first overall pick in 2008. After a promising first season, Rose went on to have the best campaign of his career, being the youngest ever NBA player to win MVP and the only Chicago Bulls player to win the accolade after a certain Michael Jordan. Fast forward, during game 1 of the following season's playoffs, Rose injured his left knee while trying to jump and he was immediately helped off the court. It was later confirmed that the young star had torn his ACL. Rose had surgery on his knee, but it was noticeable that when he came back, he was never the same. Now, he was a player that relied a lot on his speed, burst, and lateral quickness. Rose had to modify his profile in order to even stay in the league. NBA fans to this day ask themselves how much more impact Rose could have had in the NBA if he had not torn his ACL. In footballing terms, the same could be said for Ledley King. After injuring his knee in training before the start of the 2006-07 Premier League, Ledley King did not start his season until mid-September. After 2 more injury-plagued campaigns, it became clear at the start of the 2008-09 season that King's injury problems meant that he could not play in every game. Famous Spurs manager Harry Redknapp had this to say when asked about King's injury problems in 2008. There's no cure. There's no cartilage, nothing to operate on. It's just bone on bone. So it's just a question of managing it. It swells up after games and it normally takes 7 days to recover, but having played on Monday night, he's had less time than usual. He rarely trains. He mostly just goes to the gym to keep himself ticking over, but not running or anything like that. But even if he plays only 20 games a season, he's worth having because he's so good, we have a much better chance of winning. While both players managed to still have careers most players would dream of, it's no secret that knee problems put a cap on the level that they were able to achieve. So now that we have a bit of a background on the ACL, we need to take a look at why the ligament is causing so many problems among athletes, especially women's players. As we pointed out at the beginning of the video, more than 195 elite women's players have been sidelined by ACL injuries in the last 18 months. Top women's players like Beth Mead, Leah Williamson, Sam Kerr and Vivian Miedema have all suffered ACL-related injuries in the past 2 years. Various studies have been conducted to look into why female players are more prone to non-contact ACL injuries, including consultant orthopedic surgeon Nev Davis's study, which showed that female players are 4 to 6 more at risk of sustaining non-contact ACL injuries than males. Female players are also 25% less likely to make a full recovery and return to the pitch than their male counterparts. This level of injury impact can have detrimental effects on the sport, as we saw at the most recent Women's World Cup where there was 30 absences due to ACL injuries. 30.
So there are going to be a few biological differences between men and women that potentially lead women to be a little bit more susceptible to ACL tears than their male counterparts. To begin, men who grew up playing football, like myself, tend to be quite bow-legged, whereas women tend to be straight-legged or knock-kneed. Women's hips are also slightly wider than men's, which increases what's called the Q angle between the hip and the knee. And both of these facts mean that women's knees are in a slightly greater degree of valgus than men's. And as we discussed earlier, a lot of ACL tears happen when an additional valgus force is applied. Women's knees and ACLs also tend to be a little bit smaller than men's. This means that when that valgus and rotation is applied, there's potentially a little bit less wiggle room for it to move in. And this also leads to a potential practical issue from a reconstructive point of view, that everything is just a little bit smaller. A potentially more complicated surgery, coupled with the fact that tendon grafts used in this type of surgery are potentially coming from tendons that aren't as robust as men's, which may potentially increase the risk of failure in the future. And we also have to mention the role of the menstrual cycle, which isn't fully understood just yet, but in general, when estrogen levels are quite high, it causes ligaments in the body to become a little bit more lax, which thus means less stable joints. So does all of that mean that women are just forever doomed to be victims of the ACL tear? Well, not exactly. As the science and data evolves in the women's game, the more we're starting to understand that it's not all just hips and hormones. There are an awful lot of environmental and external factors that we can change to reduce the risk of ACL tears in women. But to discuss that, I'll hand you back to TJ.
So as Owen says, the issue is not all hips and hormones, and to be honest, that would be a lazy argument for me to try and combat the issue of knee injuries in the women's game. A variety of factors can be closely attributed to the barriers that female athletes face to experiencing the same health benefits as their male counterparts. Dr. Emma Ross, who is the head of physiology at the English Institute of Sport, is a leader in the industry for analysing the environmental disparities that cause female athletes to be more at risk for such injuries. Football boots are an essential piece of kit for any baller, however, they are still a hot topic amongst women's athletes. Dr. Ross explores the impact that football boots have on the ACL injuries in her book, The Female Body Bible. Now she states, you make the studs and you make the sole to withstand the capacity of the average man, and then you put the average woman in them, and as fast and as quick as they are, they're just not as powerful or as strong as the men. So those boots are now designed to grip a heavy, strong man into the ground, but you've got a lighter woman in them and they're getting anchored to the ground by them. Some brands have finally got the message and started to design football boots made for women. Nike is leading the way with the Phantom Lunar Elite, claiming that this is the most innovative and evidence-driven female boot design to date. The boot has 3 key aims: eliminate preventable pain points, improve on-pitch performance, and reduce the risk of major injuries. While there is no current evidence to suggest the level of support provided by these boots will make a difference when mitigating ACL injuries, new models can certainly measure ACL loads at different points in time. Another environmental issue at the centre of women's ACL issues is the quality of pitches available for women's footballers. The majority of games across the women's football leagues are played on artificial turf. 71,877 of the estimated soccer-related ACL injuries occurred on artificial turf, and 104,028 on natural grass. Among lower extremity injuries, ACL injuries were more likely to occur on artificial grass and natural grass in both boys and girls soccer. The theory is that because of the lack of moisture on artificial pitches, it is easier for studs to grip to the ground, resulting in the loss of available lateral movement for the leg. This is a similar growing conversation in the NFL. Last year, the American Journal of Sports Medicine examined 53 studies across all sports and levels of competition, published from 1972 to 2020. 25 of them compared foot and ankle injuries on different surfaces, and 32 examined knee injury rates on synthetic turf and on grass. In summary, they found that there are a higher rate of foot and ankle injuries on artificial turf compared with natural grass on both old and new generation turf, and that elite level football athletes were more predisposed to knee injuries on synthetic turf. Now, while American football is a game of downs and played at less intensity, it is no surprise why artificial turfs could be an issue for the women's game. Football boot alterations and pitch quality are fixes that won't take much time. However, the problem doesn't start once a female footballer signs her contract. It is no secret in Europe that males start their football journeys on average much sooner than females. From ages as young as 5, boys are already starting to learn about their running motions and submissively training their muscles. Boys are twice as likely to receive strong encouragement from teachers and coaches to play football as kids. However, there is a persistent 7% gender gap in participation between teenage girls and boys aged 13 to 16. A lack of girls playing sports from a young age means that by the time that they take the sport seriously, their male counterparts are years ahead of them in terms of development and muscle strength training. Participation from girls in PE is increasing, however, it is down to our sports governing bodies to sustain this rise to make sure that girls are getting all the opportunities possible to build their footballing portfolio.
You know, players are going out here, they already have it in their mind that they could go out and this could be their last game because they could get injured.
This is Liv. a women's football fanatic who's been firmly in the media space for 9 years and is now enrolling on her coaching badges. She also runs the account Girls United, so please be sure to check her out.
Round about when Leah Williamson did her ACL, and then Arsenal Women's Football Club, I think they had about 4 players out due to ACL ruptures and full tears. And there's not enough, in women's team, there's not enough sports scientists and doctors and team doctors that are qualified enough in the women's game to know specifically about women's anatomy. It's always been about male anatomy and how do we train males, and women's football, even though it is growing, it's going in the right direction. We don't have those set things in place. It's all still revolving around coaching for men, and then we just put the women in. Ellie Carpenter did her ACL and Alexia Putellas did her ACL, and it was, oh my God, these players could miss out on the World Cup, the biggest World Cup in women's football. And it was just, there's got to be something done. So I think around about that point, it was when a lot of other people as well, including myself, really started to question about, okay, what are FIFA doing about this? What's the FA doing about this? And ever since then, it's become a huge issue, still is. Women's football is to motivate young girls to say that they can play the game. And when you don't see your favourite players there, it does instill this sort of fear and anger in you.
With ACL injuries usually resulting in at least 9 months off the pitch, players have often been prevented from accessing state-of-the-art medical treatment and rehabilitation services provided by clubs due to their terms of employment. Many of the first WSL contracts contained a clause that allowed clubs to terminate a player's employment if they were unable to train or play for over 3 months. I'm going to put on the screen an extract taken from a 2008 standard contract. In here you can say it states if a player is unable through injury or illness to train or play for the club for a consecutive period of 3 months in the written opinion of an appropriately qualified medical consultant instructed by the club, the player shall be deemed to have suffered a long-term injury. It then goes on to state, where a player is deemed to have suffered a long-term injury, the club shall be entitled to terminate this contract by giving 3 months written notice to the player. The club may serve notice at any time after the date on which the player is declared to be suffering a long-term injury by the medical consultant. Thankfully, these types of clauses have been recently changed. The FA and PFA have agreed new benefits pertaining to injury, illness and long-term sickness, which came into effect from the start of the 2022 season to mirror those in the men's game. Significantly, the period relating to contract termination has increased from 3 to 12 months. There are also new uplifts to maternity leave and pay. This is a step in the right direction, however the mental effects of injuries are now beginning to rise to the surface as well. It is no secret that players will fear injuries, but this is a thought process that is accepted while playing a high intensity sport. However, there is a growing collective fear amongst female athletes that every time they step onto the field, it could be their last for at least 9 months. No athlete should have to live in fear of playing a sport that they love, due to what many believe is a lack of intervention by sports governing bodies into the staggering number of injuries across the sport. From a marketing perspective, it obviously isn't beneficial for women's clubs to not have their best players available during the season. As a sport that's ever growing, it's imperative that women's athletes have the deserved protection from such injuries to ensure that women's football can continue to grow economically. FIFA has already developed training programs such as the 11+ that are designed to prevent ACL injuries and have been implemented by clubs and national teams around the world. Yet, there is still a drastic need for female-specific programs to be developed. In December 2023, UEFA made an announcement that could be well considered a watershed moment for women's football: the introduction of an expert panel dedicated to exclusively understanding the improving health and well-being of female athletes. The central focus of this panel is to gain a deeper understanding of ACL injuries among female players. It has been reported that the long-term aim is to publish a UEFA consensus on ACL injury prevention and management by the summer of 2024, plus an up-to-date ACL injury prevention program.
I mean, I think it starts from the top. It does start with, we need investment. We need full-time doctors on teams. We still don't have that in the women's game. If Lauren James was to get injured, she wouldn't have the support there as the men's team would. The women's game is such an open game. We're open to anything because we have come from nothing and we are going to a place where we're trying to make that trajectory of, girls who are coming up through the ranks now, where they have those structures implemented now.
As we can see, this is a step in the right direction. The players have spoken and the medical experts are clear. Football is depriving female footballers of fair and equal treatment. The infrastructure, originally designed and built to support men, is failing the women's game. This problem has been made worse by the accelerated growth of women's football. Sports medicine specialist and former Chelsea club Dr. Eva Carnero is one of the few females to have held a senior medical position at a Premier League club. She believes that the lack of funding and gaps in female-specific research and knowledge is negatively impacting female athletes. This is what she had to say to Sky Sports. Gender is still an issue in football. You've got limited funding in the women's game and you don't have very experienced medical teams. Clubs and governing bodies owe a duty of care to all their athletes. At the very least, this includes employing physiotherapists and medical professionals with specific training and experience with the female anatomy. However, the talent pool for such professionals is limited, with coaches and physiotherapists working predominantly with men. From a legal perspective, female footballers are employees and have the right to receive the same standard of care as males. Whether you love women's football, are new to it, or don't think it's for you, it's clear that a change needs to be made. Thank you guys for watching today's video. My name's been TJ. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts.